Well, it's 3 p.m. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Jennifer Idu. I'm Head of Research at the European Travel Commission. And I'd like to first thank all of you for joining us today in this webinar, which is organized by ETC in cooperation with TOPOSOPHY. So this session basically forms part of a series of webinars ETC has been organizing since last year to support destinations, businesses, and also the wider tourism industry during the COVID-19 crisis. We have been joining forces with industry partners to bring you all the relevant and up-to-date intelligence to support the recovery of tourism. To this end, today's webinar will delve into the topic of regenerative tourism. And for this, we're pleased to have Peter Jordan and Rebecca Armstrong, co-presenters and moderators of this webinar. And we'll also have two panelists, Patrik Gustafsson, Chief Executive Officer at Amager Bakke Foundation, and Ioannis Pappas, Director of the Mediterranean at the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. Before I give the floor to our speakers, just some housekeeping information. So all participants are muted during the webinar to avoid background noise. So if you're not muted, please do so. After the presentation, we will have also a 10 minutes Q&A session. You can also write your questions in the chat box at any time during the presentation. And this webinar is being recorded, and shortly after the presentation, we will share with everybody who registered the webinar slides and recording. So with no further ado, Peter, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you for your kind introduction there. So good afternoon, everybody. And from our side at TOPOSOPHY, we'd really like to thank you for joining us. Thank you, of course, also to our panelists who are joining us this afternoon, and I'll give them a further introduction when we join them. For those of you who don't know us, for TOPOSOPHY, we're a placemaking and marketing agency with over 10 years of experience in destination management and development management and marketing. For us, this is the first time in a series of webinars we'll be doing in the coming months that will include also European Cities Marketing, HOTREC, and other partners as well. But we're extremely happy to be joining with the European Travel Commission this afternoon for this. So let's get down to business quickly with today's topic. At key points in modern history, we have found profound changes in our daily lives, and we've also been given a lot of reason to think about our interconnectedness with the planet, with each other, and with the living systems that we're in. For several years now, we have seen global warming gather pace with all the consequences that it is having for our climate. The pandemic has also exposed and exacerbated inequalities in society that were very visible in our destinations. When it comes to tourism in Europe, we're all familiar with the situation before the pandemic. And of course, we know what happened when tourism was growing too quickly, and in some situations was often making the situation worse. Now, the willingness to see tourism channeled for good is certainly not new. We heard this from destinations across Europe last year when we worked with the European Travel Commission to create the handbook on COVID-19 recovery strategies for national tourism organizations, which you can see here. It's freely available from the ETC, and we hope that it will help guide you if you are working on your own local or national tourism recovery strategy. We've also regularly built regenerative tourism principles into our work, and we have heard it from clients many times during and, of course, before the pandemic. They featured strongly in Scotland's National Tourism Action Plan, our Destination Management Plan for destinations in Greece with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and also Amsterdam's brand new visitor economy strategy, which was published just a couple of months ago. So the principles of regenerative development have been around for some time and are being applied in other sectors. But what about tourism? What does this look like so far? And to what extent has the pandemic played a role in awakening hearts and minds in our sector to put it into practice? That is what we would like to explore with you today. Now, I am presenting today with Rebecca Armstrong, who is a good friend of TOPOSOPHY. Rebecca is an experienced sustainable tourism consultant with a strong expertise in research and reporting. She's also been the lead author of ABTA's Tourism for Good report in the UK. She's also on the judging panel of the World Responsible Tourism Awards. And Rebecca is going to start today by explaining the relationship between some of the key terms that we often hear. So Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. So as Peter said, I'm just going to briefly explore the intersection really between regenerative tourism and some other terms. So starting with sustainable tourism. Sustainable tourism essentially aims to minimise negative impacts and to maximise the positive impacts of tourism on the environment, society and the economy. It tends to be fairly focused, sustainable tourism, on the industry itself, on the sector, and less on perhaps the wider factors beyond the sector. And this isn't always the case, but the danger is that sometimes it can be based on sort of business as usual while doing less or no harm and on sort of existing models. And then moving on to responsible tourism, the stated aim of responsible tourism is to create better places to live and therefore to work, and also better places to visit. And it focuses really on taking responsibility for those impacts, so identifying impacts and taking responsibility for them. And I see this whole process really as a journey. There's always more to do. And so thinking specifically about regenerative tourism, on the next slide, it's really about going deeper and further in those same ambitions that we've seen in sustainable and responsible tourism to make tourism a genuine force for good in destinations. I think the difference with regenerative tourism is it situates tourism within that broader ecosystem. So it's the interconnectivity between tourism and the wider environment that it sits within. And really its aim is to rejuvenate and nourish and bring net benefits. So going beyond just minimising harm, but actually bringing net benefits to the environment as well as people and places. And it feeds into the circular economy that we've seen in other sectors, that circular approach that we've seen developed in other sectors that's now coming into tourism. And again, in terms of how it measures success, it's very much pinned to well-being around environmental, social and economic well-being. And I think actually the great sustainability work that many companies and destinations have been doing really feeds into that. It places them in good stead to take a regenerative approach and to play their part in that process in destinations. And this quote from Anna Pollock, who's really led a lot of the thinking and developed this approach in terms of applying regenerative thinking to tourism in a practical way, I think makes the point that, you know, it's not that industrial production line. The visitor economy doesn't sit in isolation, but actually it's part of that living and networked system. And so the previous work on sustainability has really, as the next slide shows, taken us another step really along that journey towards regeneration being the ultimate destination. And this diagram that's taken from a publication called Regenerative Principles for Hospitality shows really where regeneration sits. We're aiming for that sort of top right-hand corner, and at the bottom right, conventional practice just doesn't take us where we want to get to, and actually moving through those steps through restorative and reconciliatory processes, we get to a regenerative place in terms of tourism. The next slide again shows that at the heart of this approach is the idea of being part of and contributing to a living system. So we're moving away from those extractive models that are shown on the left-hand side, and moving up to something that is ultimately restorative and life-giving part of a living system. And then on the final slide, this is based on some key principles which we're already seeing emerging in other business models, which are actually really successfully responding to demand for this kind of regenerative approach. And we're now seeing that emerging in the tourism sector as well. So back over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you. So I hope that has already helped to explain the relationship between some of the key terms that we often hear in this area. What I'd like to do now is just very quickly highlight why we're talking about this now. As Jennifer mentioned at the very beginning, part of the aim of this ETC series of webinars is to highlight areas of that are extremely important to the tourism industry right now, and to sort of highlight and shine a spotlight on where things are moving. Now, as we know, we're all aware, and I don't need to remind you, that we've seen huge changes in our priorities and in our horizons over the past year. We've also seen a very important reminder that we're not invincible and we're not more powerful than nature. We've also seen an acceleration in many cases of pre-existing patterns of behavior and concern by consumers and by businesses. So very quickly, I'd just like to show you 8 trends that suggest why perhaps tourism is going to be more open. Tourism in Europe will be more open to embracing regenerative principles in the future. And the first very much concerns nature itself. And we've all been much more aware of the environment around us, the air we breathe. And we've seen this already in some early patterns of travel behavior last year. And just from Booking.com's major study of travel sentiment last year, where over 2/3 of travelers were looking to appreciate a more perhaps slower and simple way of traveling. Also, of course, keen to spend time outdoors and go to seek those more rural, off the beaten track experiences as well. That concern around local business, that seems to be something which is definitely changing as we advance through this pandemic. We've spent a lot more time thinking about the fortunes of the businesses around us, those that we spend our money with on a daily basis. Of course, many of us are living in cities where we're not able to spend very widely, but where we can, we were trying to influence more and more. TripAdvisor found last year that nearly 3/4 of consumers found it was very important for them to support local businesses. And of course, that relates to regenerative principles in terms of ensuring that people's spending nurtures the local economy and stays within local systems. And of course, that is in the case in restaurants in particular. And staying with the subject of food, we've seen that across Europe, consumers, 90% of consumers regularly buy seasonal products, and they're thinking more and more about the provenance of these products, where they have come from. And that's important because they are prepared to leave aside products which are not produced near their home. This is from the European Investment Bank just this year found this. And when we talk about where the food that we eat comes from and the materials that we use to construct and the waste that we produce, this is a subject which cities like Amsterdam, and later we'll be hearing, of course, Copenhagen have been taking on. Because during the past year, Amsterdam has has been very public about the way it wishes to embrace the donut model of economic development to ensure that materials are increasingly sourced locally, and that waste is also treated locally in a far more efficient and respectful way for the environment. And that's important because the city's recent tourism destination, or the visitor economy strategy that was released just in December, is tied very much to the city's environmental and social objectives. And we're seeing this also occur. Many other European cities, of course, are taking the same approach. Switching back to looking at how we can influence with the way we spend money, consumers are increasingly looking for businesses to help them spend in responsible ways. And according to the same study by Booking.com that I mentioned, 69% of global travelers do expect the travel industry to be able to offer more sustainable travel options in the future. So people are actively looking for help here. Waste, of course, is important, and we're all aware, perhaps spending more time at home as well. And we're also really aware of how much waste we're producing, and concerned about where that's going and what it's doing to the environment. Of course, this isn't a recent thing. This has, of course, been a trend that we've seen in recent years, especially with relation to the way that plastics are treated. But of course, this is something which we do expect to see far more concentration on in the future. Now, how do we measure the impact? How do we measure how do we measure our impact on society, the environment, and the economy? Well, if we're honest, seems where the private sector does appear to be leading right now. And we've seen considerable movement over the past 1 to 2 years from major international organizations and foundations that have been working hard in cooperation across various sectors to improve the way that impact is measured, including, as we can see at the very bottom here, in the travel industry. The Geoadventures Ripple score is quite a good example, a new example of this, as well as the work taken by the Travel Corporation as well. So again, this is all evolving, and this is an area where we expect a lot more evolution in the future. But above all, perhaps the most important area at the moment is finance and where that's going, whether that is investment from large investment funds, which are changing their approach and looking much more closely at the long-term impact of where their spending goes. And also in this case on the European Union, which is channeling now a significant amount of money, in significant amount of investment over the coming years from 2021 to 2029 through the EU Green Deal. I'd like to just focus on that for a second, and I'm aware that this is an area of interest to the ETC and that there's increasingly going to be a lot more work on this in the future. Why do I mention it? It's because this huge package of funding, which is gradually going to be rolled out over the coming years, doesn't specifically mention tourism. So you may wonder why I'm mentioning it here. Well, the fact is that according to the action plan, as you can see here, we can see these areas of action which have been set out under the EU Green Deal. Of course, they touch on so many aspects of tourism activity, and this is why it's important to us. Then, as we can see, the critical elements of this EU Green Deal, essentially we wanted to take this opportunity to highlight it because we believe that this is where it will be important for the tourism sector in Europe to step up and show how it is able to genuinely interact proactively and partner with other industries in order to be able to channel this funding effectively. It's also going to be down to the ambition of the tourism sector in the future to make sure that this investment works in a responsible way, and hopefully that regenerative principles are applied through this funding in the future. So I hope that's helped to illustrate, give a few examples of why we're moving in this direction. I'd now like to hand back over to Rebecca, who's going to just highlight a few examples of where some regenerative principles appear to be put into practice early. So I'll hand back over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Peter. So yes, a regenerative approach to tourism really is something that's still new. It's very much developing, it's evolving in destination thinking. So we've selected just a few examples of where this type of approach is beginning to emerge. It may not use the word regenerative. Sometimes it may be a sustainability strategy, but in a lot of these cases, we're seeing regenerative thinking coming in and emerging in the way that strategies are being put together, in the way that they're linking with the wider objectives of that destination. So the first one is a new sustainable tourism strategy in Switzerland called Swisstainable, and really this reflects that kind of ambition in terms of the way it's pushing forward with its objectives, pushing forward its thinking on sustainability. It's aiming to move participating businesses and organisations through 3 levels of commitment, so from committed through to engaged through to leading the way. It focuses on enriching the destination and the traveller, and actually it's specifically framed as responding to the way that the pandemic has increased demand for authenticity, proximity to nature, considerate consumption. So it's really bringing its strategy around those things, and it is tying tourism development to Switzerland's wider commitments as well as a nation to environmental sustainability and natural resource protection. So again, we're seeing that sense of tourism being part of that wider living system in that strategy. The next example we chose is the Portugal's 2027 tourism strategy, and this is really an example of holistically measuring success. So it's not just around economic sustainability, although that is in there too, but it's also some really stretching targets on energy and water and waste. But also alongside that, social sustainability. So there's a focus on workers and people as well, with resident satisfaction with tourism being a measure of success. So again, what relationship does tourism have with the well-being of Portuguese residents and local people? and what's the interaction between them. So again, embedding tourism within that wider, those wider considerations. The next example is from my home nation of Wales. This is the priorities for the visitor economy in the 5 years from 2020. And the ambition of the strategy is to grow tourism for the good of Wales. So it's particularly pinning back to well-being and actually mainstreaming the vision of the Wales Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is legislation that requires wellbeing goals to be considered in strategic decision-making and political decision-making. So again, tourism is sitting within that broader sort of ecosystem and tied to well-being. So the goals include growing tourism in a way that delivers benefits for people and places specifically, and putting people at the centre, so that wider well-being benefits are at the heart of the strategy. The next example is from New Zealand, the Bay of Plenty, and this is specifically a plan for regenerative tourism. So this is an example of a destination that really has embraced those principles and incorporated them into its strategy. So it's a plan for purposeful tourism that supports residents and the natural environment. It focuses very much on regenerative tourism, as I was saying earlier, being the next step on from responsible and sustainable forms of tourism. And the vision of tourism is that it will help the region to flourish by regenerating rather than extracting, and that visitors will be welcomed on local people's terms and actually transformed themselves by the experience that they have there. It's very much based on understanding tourism's relationship with the place and developing tourism in harmony with that place, and setting a clear framework around how they will do that. And then the final example is of an attraction, in fact, Amsterdam's biggest attraction, the Rijksmuseum. And this is really an example of adopting circular economy thinking in its operations. So it's the first museum in the world to be awarded a BREEAM in Use sustainability certificate with the highest score of 5 stars. And again, we like this example because, as well as leading the way itself and working with its visitors to understand its impacts, it's also contributing to the broader sustainability and regenerative approach of the city itself and the destination. And I think that the point about all these examples, and there are others as well that we could have chosen, is that this is, as I say, a very emerging approach. The thinking is evolving. It will continue to do so as it's put into practice. But actually, the key point is that these organisations, have started on that process. It's early days, but they're putting these principles into practice and starting to go sort of further and deeper on that journey to regeneration and what tourism's place is in that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's very helpful for us. So actually, picking up on the subject of visitor attractions, I'd actually like to introduce our first speaker today, our first panelist, who's joined us very kindly, Patrik Gustafsson. Now, I'll give a brief introduction. Patrik is the CEO of the Amager Bakke Foundation. I hope my Danish isn't as good as it really should be. But Patrik is a man who is very attracted to bold ideas. He has over 20 years of experience in navigating the complex worlds of design, technology, user needs, policy, and organizational change. And that is certainly the case with his current position. He's leading the organization responsible for Copenhill in Copenhagen. It's the world's most energy efficient and green waste-based power plant, and it's a leading player in the city's circular economy. It also happens to be a ski slope and a green roof park. But Patrik will be able to explain it even further and a lot better than I can. So yeah, it really is a visitor attraction that gives back, so I understand, Patrik.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I will. I'm not sure if we are could be considered to be a regenerative tourism place, but I will talk a little bit about what we've done here in Copenhagen.
We will. I'll just stop my screen, and I'll ask you can share yours. Yeah.
Okay, so I will be in command here. Let's see. Here we go. So yeah, moving beyond sustainability, regenerative tourism from strategy to practice was the headline for this, and I think probably a good phrase about what we've done here. So let's move on with the slides. We have some very ambitious climate targets to achieve here in Copenhagen, and actually I would like to start from this perspective before going into the actual plant and the facility by itself. and we have some very, very ambitious targets in Copenhagen. And actually, this waste to energy plant, energy showroom, the teaching area is a part of achieving those goals. And if you look at the Danish energy ecosystem to begin with, we have some, like most other countries, a variety of sources. Wind, water, sun, biomass, biogas, and waste are marked them in green, are counted as being sustainable sources. Coal, luckily, we're about to get rid of that. Gas, and we actually have some nuclear energy. We don't have any nuclear plants in Denmark, but we do import electricity from Sweden and other countries that actually use nuclear power still. And what is kind of special here in Scandinavia is, I believe, is that we have a central heating system. So the energy that get produced at, for example, a waste energy plant can both produce electricity as well as central heating. And actually 20% of the households here in Copenhagen, where I live, are heated from the Copenhill or Amager Bakke power plant. Working with waste, as some of you are probably familiar with, I mean, we have this, we call it like a waste triangle. I mean, the first thing you should do is try to reduce the amount of waste, which is very hard. And if we can't reduce it, we can try to reuse it at least. If that's not possible, then we might be able to recycle the materials. And if that's not possible, we can utilize it for example, energy production. And the small fraction that is left could be then stored at the deposit. It could be dangerous waste and etc. So obviously, in a modern society, it's very hard to not producing any waste. But if you can sort of work with it intelligently, then it doesn't have to be a bad thing as such. And the waste to energy plants in Denmark are a part of the whole country's energy ecosystem. So by burning the small fraction of waste that you can't reuse, we can actually sort of get rid of the need of basing our energy from coal or other sources that are far worse. The plant, the Copenhill or the Amager Bakke, the Amager is the part of Denmark, and the name of this plant, Amager Bakke, Bakke means hill, is sort of plays with the fun thing that the Amager, the area where it's located, is the most flat and the lowest area we have in Denmark, and making a hill on that area is kind of ridiculous. That's why we have the name Amager Bakke, but in English it's Copenhill. It's located very close to the Queen's Castle. It's like 1.5 kilometers away, and just above this, the channel, we have the Little Mermaid, and you see the city town hall 3 kilometers away. So it's more or less sort of in a way in the middle of the town, so to say. And the whole story about this project started probably like 15 years ago. We had an old waste energy plant. It was very worn out, and we were in need of building a new one. And normally they look like this, like a big, huge box. Someone would say ugly, some would say functional, but nevertheless quite a sort of massive building. And we had a very daring and innovative CEO at that time for the waste energy, existing waste energy plant. And she decided to do a architectural competition. And it was not that they asked for a ski slope on top of the energy plant, but they did. If you read the competition material, you could sort of see that there was some kind of clues. They were actually asking for something that could leave a distinct footprint, something that worked both architecturally and aesthetically. And what happened is that BIG, Bjarke Ingels Group, the Danish world famous architects, won the competition by sort of combining the inmates, stacking the machinery in a way so you had a slope forming on this roof, and thereby you could combine some recreational facilities with the actual power plant. And this is how it looks like now. We opened a little bit more than a year ago, just before the whole Corona situation took off, luckily. And seen from the city or the flats that are apartments that are just across, and seen from above. And you can see some of the distinct features here. So you have the actual power plant, but the roof, it equals 17,000 square meters, like 3.5 soccer fields, is used for recreational purposes. So it's a green park, around 4,000 square meters. We have planted more than 70 trees on the roof. You can hike, you can run, you can play around on in the park. And then you have the ski slope, which this is actually Denmark's largest ski slope. We don't have any mountains here. So, and it's 370 meters long. And we use a special Italian made and designed ski surface. So you can go skiing all year round. And the view from above is quite spectacular. It's 85 meters tall if you stand on the top. And those photos were from I think the last summer we had. And it's very nice to walk there. Obviously now everything is more gray because it's winter, but it's a very popular place to go for the citizens. I guess partly because it's quite interesting and the landscape is beautiful, but also because it's free. So you don't have to pay to go up on the roof. You do have to pay to use the ski slope, obviously, but it's otherwise it's free access. And we have incorporated lighting, so you can go skiing or hiking during night. It's very beautiful. It's like an architectural lighting, very poetic. Some more pictures from this is the main slope. It's actually a black or red slope. The inclination starts out at 45% and then it goes down to 23%, I believe. So you get a decent speed. We have I learned in this project that it was the first time ever in Denmark that someone bought a new ski lift. So that was an interesting experience to have that approved by the local authorities. And I did try that before because we don't have any mountains here at all. And you can actually see, I mean, this is real skiing. So it actually works. It's kind of strange, the sensation, because it's very slippery and obviously it's green, but it actually works like hard packed snow or like with icy tendency. And we thought when we developed the project that now finally we're getting a mountain in Copenhagen, so we need to have a climbing wall obviously as well. And so we worked together with a Bulgarian company, a very good climbing wall manufacturer called Voltopia, and the architects obviously, and then the whole Danish climbing community to create the world's tallest climbing wall. So it's actually 80 meters of climbing, and it's so tall, so you do need to change pitch during the course. So it's divided into 4 pitches, and the climbers are pretty wild about it because it's actually pretty good. Some more pictures of that. So, but in terms of the whole theme here, I think one thing that we have really been working a lot with is to sort of ensure the value created in this project. The power plant is owned by 5 municipalities, and actually they are not allowed to build or finance this whole recreational park. So we set up a specific trust to do that. That's the trust on the CEO. So we built on the roof of the power plant. And what we have done is we try to find a combination in the organization here that ensures both high quality and efficient operations. Therefore, we have a private operator that runs the facility, but it depends heavily on user involvement. And the whole project is, obviously the idea came from the architects, but in the whole development process, I have put a lot of emphasis on engaging with the local communities. So we have, I think, more than 300 people involved from various sports clubs, other interest parties. And why is that? Well, yeah, obviously, first of all, there are, as I write here, there are solution partners. I mean, the really good skier have some ideas of how the lift should work, what kind of ski surface should they choose, how should we design the ski slopes. But obviously also they become your ambassadors. They are the experts and in the end also potential customers. So this project is like born from some very brilliant architects. We have sort of twisted it in a way to ensure that we sort of maximize the amount we give, but we try to give back to the town, to the city. And that's also why it's free to use the rooftop. So I think that's whole sort of user involvement has been key for ensuring the success of this project.
Patrik, thank you very much. Really interesting. In fact, if you don't mind, you just hop back to the previous slide there, just at the end, because for me, the red one, yes, the one with the different clubs and associations.
Yeah.
Something that I love in particular about this. I mean, I have to admit, I can't ski, but I'm sure it'd be a good workout climbing to the top.
Yeah.
Something which I really like about this actually is that. For me, it proves a couple of things. First of all, that Danes don't necessarily have to get on a plane and fly to the Alps or the Pyrenees in order to do skiing. So I guess that's good for the environment. But also, I think this is a really nice proof, as you've just said, that if you're prepared to be bold and think differently, then sometimes you can make something incredible out of local resources and local innovation and local ingenuity. Yeah. And I find this a very interesting concept. I'm just interested, how do you generally interact with these organizations? Are they're users, and you sort of partner with them?
Yeah, a lot of them are obviously like regular users of the facility, and the way we are organized here is in Denmark is that we have a very strong tradition for organized sports and voluntarily work. And so for example, all the ski clubs, now it's in Danish, the Danish names obviously, but are organized under like an umbrella, and you have a federal organization that sort of service the ski clubs and cater for their needs. So it's the Danish Skiing Federation, and on the climbing side we have the Danish Climbing Federation, and etc. So so we have in the whole development process, I sort of used various volunteers from the various clubs to test ideas, to test materials, to test solutions. And now, after we open, many of the local clubs have some discount prices for using, for example, the ski slope. And I also have an advisory board consisting of some of the more sort of important associations. And that way we can sort of track how is the satisfaction, what are the new ideas, what is the feedback from their clubs, etc.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
I find that very interesting. So you're drawing on local knowledge, local experience, and you're also, of course, giving back. I'm just curious for a final couple of thoughts about the current situation that we're in around the pandemic, and whether you think that has, how that's changed perceptions of Danes traveling, and maybe this has given a reason to stay local, and whether this has perhaps accelerated some trends that you were seeing before.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, in terms of the previous presentations, when I saw those beautiful pictures, I got the urge to travel out and see the world again. But I think we all in Denmark, at least, we had like we are under our second lockdown now, and the whole summer, obviously, the last vacation, you weren't really allowed to travel anywhere. And what happened then was that people started to discover the national interesting things. Which in a way, from like a climate perspective, probably been very good. We fly a lot in Denmark. We love to travel, and all of a sudden, everyone was local guests at their local communities. And I talked to several friends of mine who sort of experienced the country from another side, because normally you have to go abroad, right, when you're on your summer vacation. And a lot of sort of more sustainable initiatives like green camping sites, etc., has been very popular. And obviously we haven't had any foreign tourists at all to talk about on Copenhagen, but we have a lot of Danish guests on the mountain.
Brilliant.
So I'm very interested and curious to see how this summer will turn out, if we are allowed to leave the country, and if we are so, how many will actually prefer to just stay home. But yeah, time will tell.
Time will, indeed it will. Time will tell on how this has shifted the way people's outlook and their behavior. Thank you very much, Patrik. I'm really grateful for your presentation this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So then I'd like to turn to our friend Ioannis. Dr. Johannes Pappas is Director for the Mediterranean region of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, an organization which many of you may be familiar with. Johannes has almost 30 years of experience in various areas of science, focusing on sustainability for tourism, energy and environmental efficiency in infrastructure and buildings, and also in advising on climate adaptation and mitigation. He is the lead GSTC assessor for destinations, and he's also the lead trainer in Southeast Europe. So we are delighted to have you with us this afternoon, Ioannis. Thank you very much for joining us. We'd be interested to hear from you how regenerative principles are currently being treated in practical terms by the GSTC. So I'd like to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here. And of course, I'll try to, let's say, to make an introduction of our mission, activities, and how we could say we are connected with regenerative tourism. So just to start with, let me share with you the reality, because we still have these problems. I don't know, it's going to be green, blue, or another color of passport in Europe, but more or less we're still at that condition. So we have to do something about. We have not to forget that, let's say, the tourist product and the tourism, let's say, industry related with the GDP is very strong related, especially on the south part of Europe, especially countries like mine. I mean, in Greece, I'm based in Greece, but also other countries like Spain, like Italy, have a very big GDP related with that. So as you can imagine, there is a big issue back there. And of course, discussions about even sustainable tourism, which is very, very hot right now, but also on the other side, like, let's say, the next generation or whatever is going to be, it's something very hot. And we're working on that. It was very pleased to see that you have discussed about the latest outcomes from Booking.com, let's say, survey about what really actually the visitors, the users, everyone that's traveling is thinking about tourist product, the trends, and how this is connected with sustainability in general. So as you can imagine, this is connected in one another way. The trend is to increase the people that really want to have something there, even certified or related with ecotourism, whatever is going to be the terminology. And because the market is there, there is a lot of, let's say, solutions about that. So this is the mission of GSTC, to try to give a guide about solving this issue. So it is, let's say, an owner and manager of, let's say, the global standards about sustainable tourism certification. This is the mission of GSTC in the last, let's say, 12 years. And we're working with all the market. We will have a lot of members from any size and every, let's say, part of the globe relating, let's say, working with us, making any kind of support in order to deliver the most appropriate and, let's say, the most global and universal views of criteria in the end. So our criteria is the basic, let's say, fundamental starting point for us, because, and for the whole, let's say, market, because you have to have something in place in order to start discussing about principles, about pillars, about general terms. So these are, let's say, the three major standards that we have, and these are specific from the industry. Two of them are because related with hotels and travel agents, and the other one's about destination, and this is the very crucial one. And every criteria set is divided in 3 parts plus 1. So social, economic, and environmental, like you have, let's say, imagine, but most importantly, we have also management. And coming to management, because sustainable tourism, yes, it is the bridge, it is the process, like we say. It is not the ending point, it is the journey that you have to follow and you deciding to go ahead. Then the management part is also very important, and we have seen that actually this year and the year, of course, actually the year before. I mean, 2020, when we have all the situation around the globe, we have seen a very big increase, especially on destinations. I mean, public authorities that would like to contribute, to be part of the game, to be inside, supporting, let's say, this movement of sustainability. So talking about, let's say, trying to find the connection between what we have right now and what we have in the future about regenerative tourism. The first step that we are doing, and we have done that especially for the last edition of Sustainable Destination Standard, is the connection with SDGs. SDGs is another global, let's say, framework that we are also trying to correlate with and try to make, let's say, the connections from the end user, but not only, also from the people that are working inside the tourism industry, that this is there, it is available for the market. And also one of our, let's say, a major role is to try to find how we can go to this regenerative tourism and what is going to be the route. I have to remind that GSTC, it is, let's say, right now, the standard point of reference about accreditation in sustainable tourism. So this is more or less our role related with other systems like FSC or, let's say, other systems. So this is more or less the pyramid of the market that we're working inside. So we're trying to find ways, and this is something that in the future is going to be more and more intensive, how we can see the future of tourism inside sustainability, and how we can, let's say, go to the next generation, and what's going to be and what's the connection with what we have now in place, because it's a very important part. So of course, like we said, because this is the subject of today, we're trying to find a way how to move from sustainable, let's say, to something which is more related with the destination, let's say the sustainable destination tourism product, and how we can really see this part of the activity, economic activity, not only from the part of protecting, but also from generating things. I have to say that this is not something new for us, and we have seen that in many cases around the globe about examples, best practices, because we're trying to elaborate and let's say sharing examples around the globe. So most of the times, even if it's an industry example like this one about programs of sustainable, let's say, hotels, or even it is something related with the strategy and the action plans that sustainable destinations should have in place, this is something inside already in the culture that this kind of approach is giving. The only thing probably that should be done is to connect these kind of activities with the end user, and how we can really correlate with something more tangible, because most of the times the sustainable point of view and thinking about tourism, it is something that has to be connected with the end product, with the end, let's say, even monitoring of the outcome, which is something very challenging. But I have to say that everything is inside. I think this is an example from Dubrovnik. So how it is connected, the new technology on the sake of, let's say, protecting and upgrading on the left, let's say, the cultural part, which is a heritage protected area, but also how it is communicated, and sometimes not very good communicated with the citizen, which is also one part of the product. What we have seen, and like I said, it is a very big turn the last years from public, let's say, sector towards to our, let's say, approach and our strategy and our standards and everything. So we have plenty of examples, and it was great to me to see that most of the best practices, Peter, that you have shown as good practices are right now, let's say, more or less, let's say, areas around the globe that are already inside GSTC. That's very interesting for us. I like that, let's say, specific case. For example, Athens have already joined, let's say, GSTC in order to contribute in a very huge program, a strategic positioning program about upgrading the product, going to more sustainable, let's say, future. Also, some days ago, Valencia, also New Zealand, you discuss about New Zealand, you discuss about Portugal, and there are many other, let's say, cases that we have together try to see the future. So I have to say that in reality, in order to go to regenerative tourism from the, let's say, the sustainable tourist point of view, it is something that you have to transform really already existing, let's say, tools to a more, let's say, probably effective ones. This is a very, very good example of how you're doing that, how you can connect the certification coming from many different points, even from GSTC. This is a great example in let's say, in the borders of United States and Canada. It's a great example that gives the answer also from the answer for the COVID and post-COVID approach, because a sustainable destination based on that approach, it's a very good example how you can, let's say, take back the nice part of visitors that are coming because you are sustainable and not just something related with over-tourism. Of course, the market access and how the big players of the market, we have to be honest, if the big players are not giving space to this or any other kind of alternative tool, whatever is the, let's say, the name, then we are not going to be very successful. So in any way, and if the regenerative, let's say, tourism is going to be another way of pushing these activities, let's say platforms like booking.com that now is increasing the pressure for, let's say, for users in order to go to the direction of sustainability and ecotourism is very important. For our case, we are pushing to that direction in, let's say, in collaborations like, let's say, Future of Tourism, which is something that we as GSTC are supporting. It's a kind of coalition in order to see, let's say, principles and terms and actions that we have to have in order to go to the next day of tourism after COVID. So if I would like to end here, and I think I have to end here because I have taken a lot of time, this is the time that the Prime Minister of Greece, almost, let's say, 8 months before, started, let's announce the restarting of the Greek tourism period inside Santorini, you know, and he mentioned that we have to go and become more sustainable. This is the way of living. This is something we have to go. And if we see also a very good example, which is related with something that we are running now in Greece in these days, it's related also with, let's say, cruising and in collaboration with CLIA, a very big challenge also with, let's say, cruising, which is a very important part of the tourist program, especially for the south part of Europe, but also on the north part. So I have to say that there's a lot of solutions over there already, and it's connected with what we are doing in order to push the good things to happen in the destination. This kind of activities like certifying, let's say, onshore tour operators related with cruising is a very good part. We have a very long discussion and collaboration with organizations like WWF and, let's say, GIZ from Germany. And in Greece now, we have a very big project that is related with 2 very big destinations, Corfu and Iraklio, that together with CLIA, the Cruising International Line Association, GSTC, are working together in order to try to find this, let's say, model that regenerative tourism is pushing to give right now, not on the long term, a very big positive impact of changes around this kind of, let's say, activities. And
so, Johannes, actually, this is actually where I'd like to intervene also, because I know that time is short. Just on that, just to very briefly finish on the issue around cruise lines there. Do you believe, and you said that this is starting, I think, beginning of this road. Do you personally, do you feel that the cruise industry has the capacity to fully adapt regenerative principles?
I think right now, I think right now there are the tools. From our part, we are collaborating, also participating in some studies that right now the cruising industry and together with the European Commission is working on. And it's very interesting to see that, yes, there are ways to try to, let's say, to find, let's say, the right tools and the right opportunities and challenges in order to go through and go to that direction. Of course, there are a lot of issues that we have to discuss, but if we focus on the destination and not just only on the cruise port of, well, let's say, part of the discussion, there are so many nice, good practices and tools and people and organizations that would like to support and would like, let's say, to give the place in order to become more sustainable, this part of the game, this part of the market. I think it's going to be feasible based on this kind of examples to show to the destinations, of the other destinations, that there are answers.
Okay.
There are steps that have to be taken, and we hope to support on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's a really interesting topic to bring that to a close there. But I'm very grateful for you taking the time to explain it to us. I'd like to go back to Jennifer because I think we just have a few minutes here just to cover any questions that have come in, and then we'll proceed for a wrap up so that we make it on time.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we have a few questions. I have a question myself too. Because there is a lot of confusion, when it comes to green tourism, sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism, all these terms. And then we're also talking about the GSTC accreditations and so on. So it's very important to avoid this sort of confusion, and also to make sure the industry as a whole is not misusing the term regenerative tourism. So I have a few questions, a bit for everyone. And I'll start with Rebecca. You mentioned several examples at the beginning of your presentation. So I would like to know what is the key element, because you went through them quite quickly and I'm concerned about the time limit. But what is let's say, the key element to put all these examples under regenerative tourism? You mentioned Switzerland, you mentioned also Portugal. So what's the common denominator across all of them for them to be categorized, or yes, being part of projects of regenerative tourism? And I also have another question for Patrik. I was a bit surprised when you started your presentation saying that you were not quite sure whether it could be regenerative tourism or not, but then the example proved that it could be, or it is. And I was just wondering how you measure success of this project. And I think that's it. And another question that we got from the audience, which is in line with what I just mentioned. It says sustainability involves regenerative actions by default, tree planting, beach cleaning, etc. So not sure if regenerative places, sustainable, are the same. So it's just to know what your views are in this sort of mix of terms. Maybe Peter could help us with this.
From my side, actually, just a small mention there, because I will pass to Rebecca, who will be able to help further with this. I think that actually Ioannis picked up on something important there, is that we're not necessarily talking here about wiping the slate clean and starting afresh with an entirely new approach. Instead, many things that destinations are putting into practice already could be classed as regenerative practices. So it's not a case of completely stopping and starting again, because we certainly also don't want to discourage people from making many of the positive actions that they've already started on. And we know that as we start to emerge from this crisis, people will be working on their recovery strategy, and that will be based on many of these principles too. So we're not necessarily here talking about stopping everything we've done in the past and starting again. And with that, I thought it'd be handy to hand over to Rebecca, because you'll be able to talk about some of those common themes there and separate some of the terms for us.
Sure. I mean, I think I agree the terminology can be really confusing. There's so many different terms out there, but I think actually the intent is sort of the most important thing for me, is the intent to make the destination better for the people who live there, for the people who visit. I think that's the key thing for me, and putting the place at the heart of the approach, not necessarily just tourism or just another sector that we might be talking about, but how do each of these sectors together create that regenerative impact in the place? So how do they make the place better? And in terms of tourism development, that therefore leads us to say, okay, as a destination, what do we need? What does our destination most need from tourism, and how could we adapt and develop tourism in a way that best serves those needs and best honours the place and best makes it the best place it can be to live? I think that's a really important. But also, individual companies and organizations then have their part to play in that process, and actually their own sustainability operations are absolutely crucial in that. So if you have a really responsible company, a sustainable company that has addressed its own impacts and is ready to play its part in that regenerative process, that's crucial. So as Peter says, we're certainly not suggesting that we wipe the slate clean and we start with a whole new approach. It's an evolving, emerging approach that is all about making those places better.
Thank you. Maybe we can move to Patrik.
Yeah, you talked about the metrics and the success criteria. I mean, obviously, in my opinion, being sustainable is also to have the financials working. So if we go bankrupt in the foundation, then we have to close down everything. So we do have one thing we also spent a lot of time and energy to work on is obviously market projections and our business case, and well knowing that it's kind of a riskful project because it hasn't been really tried before, but we do have some okay marketing analysis, and we have some visitor numbers that we will try to sort of make sure that we can meet in order to have a economical viable organization. But apart from that, I mean, everything is doing fine. We have the visitors that we need. We earn the money that we need, and it's actually built into the business model. I was actually the one who did that. A way of, I mean, we have the private operator. He has some things he can earn a lot of money on, doing corporate events, selling beers and drinks and renting out equipment, selling equipment. But the core offering using the ski lift is actually organized in a way so he's not really allowed to earn any money from it. And we did that to ensure to keep the price as low as possible. So so we can make skiing available to a broader public. But apart from that, like one metric, if you will call it that, for me at least, is to see happy people are using the facility. So you saw some of the images, where when I walk on the roof and I see happy kids playing around, elderly people strolling up and down the mountain landscape, happy skiers, people with smile on their face. That's the sort of the core reason why we did this and invested so much energy and time into it. Obviously, it's important for us that the financials also work, but they do, luckily. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. There is one more question coming from the chat box. After 27 years in sustainable tourism specialized on Greece, the summary is that it's quite difficult to convince local people to realize sustainability. So tourists look for healthy nature and experiences, but still national tourism organizations focus on mass tourism. So how could we convince politics to respond more responsibly? I guess that question goes for
Johannes. Would be interested to hear what Johannes has to say about that.
Can you repeat, because I haven't heard so good.
Essentially says that tourists look for healthy nature experiences, but still at an NTO level or national tourism organizations keep focusing on mass tourism. So how could we convince politics to respond more responsible?
We're trying to persuade people, and we try to persuade actually decision makers based on some, most of the times, voting processes to make the change. So it is a matter of the mentality of the people that we discuss. I mean, for us, some cases you have to come bottom up on their top-down approach. So we have seen all kinds of models. In any case, what we have to agree is what kind of model we would like to have on the long term, because especially on the south part of Europe, most of the times there is a very short-term thinking about strategy. So we have to decide what is best for us, and not only on the national level, mostly on the destination level, because the destination has to take, let's say, to take over the future, especially this period. And we have seen this kind of examples. Of course, always the top of the pyramid has to have, let's say, the decision, the end decision, or let's say part of the decision. But only if we have something tangible, something very useful, very meaningful, and very logical, which sustainable tourism. And I have to say that regeneration is the heart of sustainable tourism. We see that there is no other way to persuade these guys. And I think this is the outcome we have right now. We persuade these people. More and more are coming. And this is the positive outcome for our experience.
Thank you. And another question for Ioannis. From all the examples that you mentioned during your presentation, what would you highlight as regenerative tourism? Because we saw many examples of, and it was mentioned several times, the term sustainability, but to avoid this sort of confusion and mixture of terms.
I think the most important parts that we would like to emphasize right now, in most of the cases, is the connection of the generation of, let's say, parts of, let's say, food, part of agroeconomy towards the whole supply chain of tourism. If we try and find the ways to connect the, let's say, the daily life and the outcomes that someone can have, not only the visitor, the traveler, but especially the citizen of the destination, then we're going to have a success. So I see the most important initiatives right now, things related with food, things related with creation of, let's say, anything related with gastronomy, things related with culture and connecting and supporting the local culture and actually protecting this culture. This is the challenge that we are going to have in the future because of the globalization of everything. And this is something that we have to protect in any way.
Okay. Excellent.
Lively conversation this afternoon. I can see, especially where we bring cruise lines into the equation. But I guess that's natural. And hey, as we all know, that the tourism sector is certainly a complex one, and that these issues are certainly not resolved easily. I wonder then, maybe this, Jennifer, is an opportunity for me to wrap up and just give a few closing words. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Patrik and Johannes, for joining us this afternoon, and of course for presenting alongside Rebecca, and of course to the European Travel Commission to hosting us here today together. I think just a quick conclusion from our side is that regenerative tourism practices are happening on a small scale, and that's the good news. It's also been shown that they're feasible and they're already being put into practice. Of course, it's early stages, and we can see the fundamental transformations that are required, and they're complex. However, we do see a growing movement to adopt regenerative development models in the tourism industry more widely in the coming years. I think that's important because the period we are right now, COVID has given us that opportunity to look at places and destinations without tourists and think about how that absence has been felt. And also to think about how in the future the aspects of tourism that are positive, how do we take those and how do we scale them up? So from our side, I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon, to our audience. And I'll hand back to you, Jennifer.
Well, I would like to thank the team of TOPOSOPHY and our panelists today, and also all the participants that were able to join us. And just a very quick reminder, we will share shortly after the presentation the webinar slides and the recording. And we see you everyone again in the next webinar. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.